a podcast where we will explore the dark corners of our world, the weird, the creepy, and the strange. I'm your host, Eric Carrier. My co-host is Jessica Carrier. Thank you for joining us for a journey into the unknown. Let's get started with today's show. Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. This is the Prairieland Paranormal Podcast, and I am your host, Eric Carrier. As always, I'm here with my wife and co-host, Jessica Carrier. This is episode 6. Jess, what do we have in store for our listeners today?
Today we are going to be talking about little people or little folk.
The magical kind or the wrestling kind?
The magical kind. And we are going to be taking a little bit of a different angle on the subject, in that we are limiting our discussion to only stories and legends pertinent to North America.
Jessica, this is your brainchild. Why the interest in little people?
Actually, I've always been interested in little people, like fairies and leprechauns and gnomes. The idea of little creatures that look like us and that are magical is kind of intriguing. As a child in Oregon, I would explore the woods and search for gnome holes in trees. I think I was probably the only 7-year-old girl who dressed up like a gnome for Halloween. As I got older, I kind of just figured that these types of creatures and stories only took place in Ireland or somewhere in the British Isles. I guess I could imagine some sort of fairy creature alive in New Zealand, but never anywhere where I would happen to be. Then I heard about some encounters and stories about these types of creatures in North America, and I was kind of excited about that.
I got to say that I wasn't real excited about this at first, but once we started the research, I actually kind of got into the stories myself. So before we get started with today's show, we just wanted to take a second and to thank everyone who has been joining us on social media. If you're interested in engaging with us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, all of those accounts can be accessed through our website, which is www.prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. We've got quite a few new listeners on Facebook, and we would certainly like to welcome you guys along on this journey.
Yes, welcome. We're so grateful to have you.
We also want to remind you that if you've had an experience that you would like to share, that you can also submit those experiences through our website. We also want to let you know that we have a new YouTube channel that will be coming out hopefully this week or next. The goal with this channel is not just to blast full episodes of the podcast, but to take highlights and interesting stories from the podcasts and turn them into short 10-minute or less videos. We are calling these episodes Pod Bites because they are just little bits and pieces of the podcast. I think the name is pretty clever. As always, RJ Jenkins has continued to provide some illustrations for the cover art, and this week she submitted a picture of a puckwudgie. If you're not familiar with what a puckwudgie is, just hold on a few minutes and we will definitely explain that to you. But as always, RJ, thank you.
Thank you, RJ.
The artwork is fantastic. Lastly, if you're enjoying the podcast, we would invite you to please consider sharing it with your friends and your family and leaving a review on your favorite podcast player. Oh, one more thing that I wanted to say real quick. This episode is going to be diving pretty deep into some Native American lore. Some of the words that we're being asked to pronounce are quite difficult. We have done everything that we possibly can to make sure that we are pronouncing these words correctly, but we are quite likely making mistakes. It is certainly not our goal to offend anyone, and if we are making mistakes, we hope that you will be forgiving. All right, let's get started with today's show.
European lore is full of stories of little folk. Stories from this region are chock full of characters such as leprechauns, fairies, brownies, gnomes, trolls, pixies, and goblins. Races that many cultures believed existed, but are now somehow largely forgotten. But what about North America? Do we have any stories or legends regarding little people? It turns out the answer is yes. While not talked about as openly as in Europe, Native American lore, in particular, is very forthcoming and heavy with stories. It seems that every tribe has a story of small, magical little folk.
Throughout the United States, there are many Native American tribes that have legends regarding little folk. They may call them by different names, have varying levels of rapport with them, and report them to be of different sizes, but they all have striking similarities. Primarily, these beings tend to be between 6 inches and 3 foot tall, are humanoid, sometimes hair-covered, and have attitudes that range from friendly to downright ornery. Another common finding is that they all live among nature and have either mystical or magical powers. Little people are also known to be pranksters and tricksters, sometimes using these abilities to gain advantage over humans or lure them into dangerous situations. Most tribal legends warn people to avoid little people and caution to not intrude on their territory.
In 1932, 2 Wyoming gold miners were blasting through a mountainside in Casper, Wyoming, when they found a fully formed mummy just over 1 foot tall. The mummy was found in a small room that had been opened up by the blast and appeared to be a little man sitting in a cross-legged position. The men bundled up their find, descended the Pedro Mountains, and carried it into Casper. News of the find spread quickly, and the little mummy eventually made its way to the desk of Ivan Goodman, the car salesman, who used the mummy to draw in clients. The mummy was eventually loaned to the Wyoming State Historical Society, who performed X-ray examinations on it.
While some speculated that the find was nothing more than an anencephalic infant, the X-rays suggested something completely different. The bone density, growth plates, and the teeth all suggested that this was a fully formed male, approximately 65 years old. The X-rays also suggested that he had died from blunt force trauma to the head. Subsequent examinations were conducted by the American Museum of Natural History in New York and the Anthropology Department at Harvard University. Both agreed and declared the mummy to be that of at least a 60-year-old man. Timothy McCleary, a professor at Bighorn College, states that the Crow tradition suggests that little people heavily populated Wyoming and coexisted with the tribe.
They live like humans do, but they have spiritual powers. They cook, they hunt, they eat, they have fire. They're not going to hurt anybody, but they do like to play tricks. But it isn't mean. It's more that they have a sense of humor. They have in the past been known to take babies and raise them as their own, and on occasion, when families are camping in the mountains, parents might tell their children to come back to camp before it gets dark because of the little people.
McCleary also states that in the Crow language, they are not called little people. They are called the owners of the earth. They protect the animals, so when people hunt for meat in the mountains, they leave some for them. They are the ones who take care of the game, so you have to show them respect. McCleary also says there is an old trail to get to the mountains, and there is a 1,000-year-old monument where people to this day still leave things for the little people. They do this to show respect for their home.
McCleary told a story of a friend who went to the mountains to get away for a few days, and while sitting around a campfire, a little man came and visited. This went on for 3 nights, and when his friend left, the little man accompanied him home. Shortly after, both agreed it was uncomfortable for the little man to be away from his familiar surroundings. Then the man returned the little man back to the mountains.
Leslie Hanna, who is Cherokee, shares a similar story. Hanna, his wife, and daughter traveled frequently between his home in Oklahoma and Kansas. When returning to Kansas from a Thanksgiving trip, his daughter, who was only 3 or 4 at the time, came into her parents' room and asked to sleep with them. My wife and I were half asleep and said okay. The next morning, I asked her why she had got in bed with us, and she said, "The little man in my room, he's bothering me." I kind of dismissed it and thought maybe she had a dream. Well, the next night, she again climbed into our bed, and the next day, she again said the little man was bothering me. The next night, before she went to bed, Hannah asked his daughter if the little man was still there, and she replied, "He's right there, in the closet." I asked her what he was doing, and she said, "He's just standing there looking at you." Hannah said he sat down and spoke in the direction of the little man. "Clearly you came back with us from Oklahoma, and you are welcome to stay here as long as you behave. If you scare my daughter, I will come after you with some medicine, and I know people who can do that." And from that time on, she said he left. So as long as you respect them, don't mess with their stuff, they'd leave you alone. If you are out in the woods hunting or fishing, you might sit on a tree stump with a hole in it. That might be a portal to their world. Hannah states that it's like you're sitting on their front porch, and they might do something to get back at you, like untie your shoelace or take something of yours and hide it. But they do it for a purpose, not just to be mischievous.
Many Native American tribes have stories about magical beings who resemble small people. One of these tribes is the Wampanoag. They call these creatures pukwudgies. These beings are 2 to 3 foot tall, or knee height, humanoid, and have large facial features and fingers. They have been described as having smooth, gray skin that sometimes glows. They resemble what most people would think of as a troll or a goblin. Pukwudgies have supernatural abilities and are often reported to be sinister. They quite frankly enjoy tricking and harming people. They can appear and disappear at will, making any appearance to a human either accidental or completely intentional. Some Native Americans have described them as being able to transform into part porcupine, part human-type creature, with the front half looking like a person and the back half covered with quills.
Pukwudgies are known to have magic, and they have no problem using it to attack people. Their goal, it seems, is to trick and lure people to their deaths so that they can collect their souls. They are also reported to be proficient with poison arrows and can create fire, and disappear or appear at will. They are the rulers of the Taipaiwankas, who are supposedly the souls of men they have lured to their deaths. Taipaiwankas are often described as balls of light, similar to reports of will-o-wisps. Obviously, these creatures are meant to be left alone, and Native American lore says that if you do happen to cross one, you should never mess with it. Stories have been told of them kidnapping people, pushing them off of cliffs, attacking them with rocks, shooting them with poison arrows, stabbing them with small knives and spears, or even causing mental breakdown resulting in people being lost in the woods and never found.
Lore has it the Pukwudgies and people used to get along well together. But then for some strange reason, the Pukwudgies turned against man. The Wampanoag have a legend that may explain why Pukwudgies are antagonistic towards humans. This legend comes from the Cape Cod, Massachusetts area of the United States. The Wampanoag believe in a great creator, who was a giant they called Moushop. The people worshipped Moushop, but the Pukwudgies were jealous of this affection. They had given aid to people over the years, and it angered them that they did not get the same affection and worship as Moushop did. So they gave up on humans and decided to torment them instead. The native people, tired of this torment, turned to Granny Squatnet, Moushop's wife, for help. Moushop accommodated the humans by grabbing and shaking the Pukwudgies until they became confused. He then tossed them all around New England. Some died, but others survived and made their way back to Massachusetts.
The Pukwudgies that survived were so angry they extracted revenge on the Wampanoag people. They kidnapped children and drew others into the woods where they killed them. As protectors of the Wampanoag people, Squatnet and Moushop stepped in again and sent their 5 sons to deal with the Pukwudgies. Unfortunately, the Pukwudgies were prepared and lured the sons into deep grass where they killed them with magic arrows. Moushop's retaliation was swift and gruesome. He crushed any Pukwudgie he found, but many escaped. They regrouped one last time and tricked Moushop into some water and shot him with their poison arrows. It is at this point that Moushop disappears from the Wampanoag stories. Some legends claimed he was killed, and others claimed that he was too depressed from the loss of his sons to continue the fight. Whatever the case, the Pukwudgies still seem to carry a sinister distrust and intent towards the Wampanoag and man in general.
There continue to be sightings of Pukwudgies today. One of the places they are most reported to be seen is in Freetown Falls River State Forest in Massachusetts. This forest is also part of Watuba Reservation, which now belongs to the Wampanoag Nation. The sightings are so prevalent that the local government has even put up road signs warning travelers to be wary of their presence. Pukwudgies are said to fixate on people who see them. Seeing them once often leads to future encounters. Christopher Balzano from SpookySouthCoast.com writes about one such encounter.
Joan was walking her dog through the state forest in Freetown, Massachusetts on a cold Saturday afternoon in April when she saw the monster. As she and her dog Sid walked down the path, Sid became anxious and strayed a few feet into the woods. Joan followed him and stopped short. Her dog was lying completely flat in the leaves, and on a rock 10 feet away was a Pukwudgie. She described him as looking like what she would describe as a troll, 2 feet high, with pale gray skin, and hair on his arms and on top of his head. The monster seemed to have no clothes, but it was difficult to tell because his stomach hung over his waist, almost touching his knees. His eyes were a deep green, and he had large lips and a long, almost canine nose. The Pukwudgie stood, watching her, staring straight at her with no expression, almost like it was stunned to see her. Joan froze and remembers thinking the air in her lungs had been pushed out. Sid finally came to and ran back towards the trail, dragging Joan, who was still holding the leash tightly. Although the whole exchange took less than 30 seconds, it's remained with Joan 10 years later. She has not gone back to the forest, but feels that that might not be enough. 3 times since the event, she has woken up to find the creature looking in on her. It has never attacked her or spoken to her. She has merely seen it looking through her bedroom window, staying just long enough for her to notice him. All 3 times, she claims she was fully awake and could move if she had to. Another location which is well known for Pukwudgie sightings is Mound State Park in Anderson, Indiana.
The Unwituunzi are child-sized human-like creatures who live in rocks and cliffs. In English, we would call them dwarves or fairies. Their name in Cherokee means little people. These creatures prefer to remain invisible, but sometimes appear to humans. If you do happen to catch a glimpse of one, you're probably in trouble. Seeing one is often considered an omen of impending death. They have been described as well-proportioned, even beautiful, with hair that is so long it almost touches the ground. The Unwituunzi are sometimes secretly helpful to humans and often use their magic to serve humans. They enjoy music and are often reported to be singing, drumming, or dancing. They care for nature and would rather not be disturbed. For the most part, they choose not to involve themselves with humans, but if they do, and you disrespect them, they can be aggressive.
At one time, the Cherokee Nation website described the protocol for dealing with little people. The website is no longer operational, but it did state, "The little people live in rock shelters, caves in the mountains, or laurel thickets. They don't like being disturbed and may cause a person who continually bothers them to become puzzled throughout life. Because of this, traditional Cherokees will not investigate or look when they believe they hear little people. If one of the little people is accidentally seen, or if he or she chooses to show himself, it is not to be discussed or told of for at least 7 years. It is also common practice to not speak about little people after nightfall." Cherokee tribal lore actually separates the Unwituunzi into 3 different clans. Some of these sects favor humans more than others, and each of these tribes teaches its own moral lesson. The first clan is the Rock Clan. This clan is known to be malicious. Some think that they are so angry towards humans because their space has been overtaken by humans. They teach humans the importance of balance in respecting limits and boundaries. The second clan is the Laurel Clan. This clan is known to be mischievous. They are compassionate, comical, and cheery. They love to play tricks on humans, which teaches them to not take things too seriously. They remind us that we should always keep joy within us and then share it with others. The third clan is the Dogwood Clan. This clan is known to be benevolent towards humans. They are stern and serious and prefer not to be disturbed. This clan gives a lesson of kindness. They teach that we should be considerate to others, not for a reward, but because of a compassionate heart.
All of these Unwituunzi are overall considered to be intelligent and capable of doing favorable deeds for people who treat them with respect. As mentioned before, if you do see them, it may be an omen of your impending death. Stories are told of people who are lost in the woods and then rescued by the Unwituunzi, just to die prematurely when they told others of their experience. Legend states that if you see one of these beings, you are not to talk to it.
This is a Lakota story, but it still applies well to the Cherokee belief in not speaking about little people encounters. The story goes that a woman was involved in a bad automobile accident while driving on the reservation. The accident caused her car to roll and slide off the road into a deep ravine. She was trapped there for several days, and no one could find her vehicle in the ravine. Eventually, she says she was rescued and pulled from the vehicle by a group of little people who nursed her back to health. When they released her, they instructed her upon leaving that she should not discuss or talk about her experience or she would be cursed. She was later found walking on the reservation. Upon arriving home, she shared her experience with a tribal elder, who also instructed her that she should not speak of this event to anyone, confirming to her that doing so would bring misfortune. Unfortunately, she decided to forego all warnings and share her story about a week later with a local newspaper. They wanted to interview her at the spot of the accident, and as she was driving back to the spot, she was mysteriously killed in another car accident. So it seems that following strict tribal protocol regarding honoring and not speaking about little people encounters may be in order.
Other protocols dictate that if you build your home too close to their environment, it is important to leave food for them and not inhibit their movements by barring any paths or walkways. This is common among many tribes, including the Mohegans. Rachel Sayet states her great-aunt told her, "We Mohegans still leave baskets full of things for the little people to appease them and to show them gratitude for taking care of us." Tales are also told of these fairy creatures doing chores for humans who live close to them. But don't peek. If you hear them working, you should not look outside. Cherokee people have a special affinity towards little people, and stories are told of little people accompanying them on the Trail of Tears, where they were a support and help during such hard times. Before the tribe migrated, they were given the gift of an everlasting fire. During months on the trail, through wind, snow, and rain, the little people kept the fire safely burning. According to Cherokee legend, the little people continue to protect the fire that still burns today.
The Cherokee also have another legend of another group of little people.
The story tells of some ancient Cherokee men exploring their environment and discovering a southern community of little people they called Sebeda-Jiwi. These little men and women were described as unusually shaped and were only as tall as a man's knee. They lived in sandville nests covered with dry grasses. The Sebeda-Jiwi were so small and frail that they became prey to birds, especially great flocks of geese. While the Cherokee men were staying with this tribe, they noticed how agitated the little men became when the threat of geese was upon them. The Cherokee men asked them why they didn't defend themselves against these geese. The little people explained that they didn't know how to guard against the geese and defend themselves. It was at this time that the Cherokee taught these little men how to make and use bows and arrows. They also showed them how things like sticks and rocks could be used as weapons. With this newfound power, the Sebeda-Jiwi clubbed the geese who tried to stick their necks into their nests. They fought thousands of geese for hours and killed most of them. The defeated fowl flew away and the little people cheered in their newfound skills. The Sebeda-Jiwi showered the Cherokee with praise and food. The legend continues that these little people continued to successfully fight off the geese year after year, until a flock of sandhill cranes attacked. The necks of the cranes were so tall that the little people were unable to hit them in the neck. The story goes that after a great battle, all the little people were killed by the cranes.
The Yahasuri are a type of little folk known to the Catawba tribe in South Carolina. The name means the wild people. They are described as being about 2 feet tall and hairy. They live in the forest and love to play tricks on people. These magical beings generally live in tree stumps and eat things like acorns, roots, fungi, turtles, small amphibians, frogs, and bugs. Like the Eastern European Fae, they are known to kidnap children and braid horses' manes and tails. They are rumored to protect themselves with deadly magical arrows and are prone to attack if anyone gets too near. For some reason, the Yahasuri tend to direct their tricks towards children more than adults. One popular tactic is to place magical spells on children's clothes left out at night to dry. This can make infants colicky, so Catawba women did not leave their children's clothes out at night, even if they were still wet. The Catawba and other native parents used the threat of the little people to encourage their children to be obedient. Lula Owl, a Cherokee elder, tells about growing up in the Quahala boundary of the eastern band of the Cherokee Indians in Cherokee, North Carolina. She said when she and her mother would go into the forest to gather chestnuts, berries, or greens, her mother would always caution her to watch for the little people because the mean ones might do something bad to them. Lula said, "I never seen no little people," but she minded her mother to keep close and keep a keen eye out as she gathered in the forest. There is at least one traditional way of dealing with the Yahasuri, and that is to rub tobacco on your hands and recite a special incantation against them.
The Muskogee people have a legend of the Esti La Pochki, which translates to little people. They are often referred to as Si. The Si can be separated into 2 different kinds, distinguished by their height and demeanor towards people. The taller ones seem to be more benevolent towards humans, but the shorter ones are considered to have a crazed mindset and are to be avoided. The sea live in hollowed-out trees, in the treetops, or on rocky cliffs. Their homes are distinguished by thick mounds of twigs and tree branches. They are reported to be strong and handsome with long, healthy hair. Sometimes they are reported to have long toenails. The Muskogee medicine people use the sea to guide them to medicinal herbs. When they have an encounter, they consider it too sacred to share.
The Chickasaw people call little folk Yagana Chu. The name is not specific to little people, but is a general reference to all types of fairy creatures. Sometimes these beings are referred to as tribal ancestors who live in the forest. They are depicted to be 3-foot-tall humanoid-like creatures who, like other fairies, choose who they will allow to see them. They can help people in trouble or play tricks on those who have offended them. It's usually hunters, medicine men, or children who are granted the privilege of seeing them. There are stories of Yagana Chu, even occasionally allowing children to live among them. These children are considered special and are believed to have been granted special healing powers. The Chickasaw people treat the Yagana Chu with respect and give them space. If they believe little folk are in a particular area, they will move. Apparently, the mortal enemy of the Yagana Chu is the wasp, whose sting can kill them.
The Shoshone tribe call the little folk Nanumbi. They do not have such a good relationship with the fairy folk. The Nanumbi are aggressive and attack people with poisoned arrows. In the Shoshone and Paiute language, this translation means people eaters. They reported to kill and eat humans, as well as cannibalize their own kind who became too ill or old. In 1778, a Christian missionary by the name of Zeisberger, who worked with the Shoshone Nation, discovered proof of a 3-foot-tall pygmy people who lived near Coshocton, Ohio. He wrote in his journal that he discovered a burial ground for this pygmy race. Nothing else was mentioned about them except that they used stone tools, made pottery, and divided their land into squares. Could this be proof of the Nanumbi? Perhaps. But with the burial site long since destroyed by modern agriculture and development, we will never know.
These are not the only graves that have been found. An 1876 New York Times article described numerous graves discovered in Tennessee that contained skeletons of pygmies. Initially, the remains were thought to be those of children. However, later examination revealed that this is probably not the case. In this state, burying grounds have been found where the skeleton appear to have been pygmies. It is affirmed that the skulls that were found had wisdom teeth and must have belonged to persons of mature age. 2 bodies were found in a vast limestone cavern, neither of them more than 4 feet high. The hair seemed to be sandy or inclining to the yellow.
The Choctaw Nation called the little people Hatak Awasa, or sometimes just Hutak. These beings played an important role in helping shape the character of the Choctaw people. The Hutak is a forest dweller who tests young men. They take young boys who wander into the woods and lead them to a cave where 3 white-haired spirits test them. The boys are shown a knife, a batch of poisonous herbs, or a batch of medicinal herbs. Whatever the boy chooses decides his path in life. If he chooses the good herbs, he will be a healer or a doctor. He will be helpful and influential in his tribe. He is then tutored by the ancient spirits in the use of herbs, roots, and bark to help and heal his tribe. Of course, not all the Hutak are considered good or helpful. They tend to treat people as they are treated. They can just as easily be aggressive and vindictive as they can be benevolent and instructive. Because of this, parents warn their children that the little people could come out of the earth and destroy them if they are not good. As with many tribes, they are used to threaten disobedient children. The Hutak are selective about who they let see them. They generally show themselves to children and medicine people. They are not viewed as an evil, just mischievous, yet people still keep their distance.
There are several other encounters or experiences that are not related to Native American stories. Author David Ferris shared this experience in his book, Mysterious Oklahoma. The incident took place before the U.S. Civil War. A Virginia aristocrat named George Merle lived with his Cherokee wife near the town of Park Hill in the Cherokee Nation. This is where he used to fox hunt with friends, aided by a pack of hounds. One night, the hounds were hot on the trail of something that they could not seem to overtake. One of the members of the hunting party was a newspaper man named S.W. Ross. In 1937, he told the story of that hunt to the Indian Pioneer paper, an oral history of frontier times. Ross was quoted as saying, "From their excited baying, the fast-running animals were apparently quite near their object of pursuit. Merle and his friend James Lotta were riding after the pack. Major Merle and Mr. Lotta were close together, and upon coming near the hounds, saw running at great speed, immediately in front of the foremost hounds, a dwarf-like being with long black hair streaming in the early breeze run on a short distance and then suddenly vanish, leaving no trace nor track. Immediately the hounds laid down, panting and weary." Ross added, "The men stood in awe, unable to believe their eyes."
Author Mark Muncy shares this story in his book Eerie, Florida. He has been able to corroborate the story with 3 witnesses. When he was working on his book, he states he was contacted by a woman who told him about this encounter which took place on her uncle's citrus farm in the 1940s. She states that they started to notice that a large amount of fruit was going missing. They naturally thought it was some sort of animal, so they set out some traps. They were shocked to find a 6-inch, naked, hair-covered little man in one of the traps. The little man yelled at them in some strange language, and not knowing what to do, the police were called. The police thought it was probably an escaped circus performer, and suggested that they just let it go, as he was obviously too small to be stealing all the missing fruit. So they did as directed and released the little man. The next day, when they checked the traps again, the little man was again in one of the traps, and this time he was found with fruit. The police were called again and decided to take this little man to the station to see if they could get a translator to interpret what he was saying. The little man was too small for handcuffs, so they loaded him in a fruit crate and carted him away. That night, the family was awakened by a terrible racket going on outside. When they checked, they found dozens of little men outside attacking the house with sticks and stones. The family called the police, and they returned back to the farm with the little man that was at the station. The family begged the officers to let the captive little man go, so the attacks on their home would stop. The officers really didn't have any reason to keep the little man captive if the family was not going to press charges. So they agreed, and the little man was released. Once the little man was released, the attacks stopped. The family believed the little men were red hats, or gnomes, and requested a bloodstone from Ireland. The stone was placed on their property, and they never had issues with the little men again.
Another story goes that a mother and her children decided to have a picnic in the forest. While eating lunch, the family heard strange music playing close by. It sounded like any music they'd ever heard, and they found it particularly strange because there was no houses in the woods, nor had they seen any people nearby. The music got louder and began coming closer. The mother didn't want to stick around to see what was making the music, so she gathered her children and left. The little girl, who is now a woman, didn't just hear music that day. She saw small people dancing in a circle in the woods. She didn't tell people for many years, for the fear that they would not believe her. So Jess, that's all of the stories that we were able to collect. Personally, I found it quite interesting that all of the Native American stories were so similar.
I found that interesting too. It's like there are certain rules that came along with these special beings.
Yeah, the rules all seem to be very similar too. You know, the first one being not really to look at these creatures. Why do you think that's the case?
I don't know. It's not that you're not only supposed to look at them, but if you do see them, you're not supposed to talk about them.
Yeah, it's not really clear if that is to protect them or to protect us, but it sounds like it has some degree of protecting us because a lot of the stories indicated that if you did talk about them, it could be an omen of your impending death.
Yeah, but is it because of something that they're doing to curse us, or is it just part of like the natural laws?
Well, based upon the evidence that I have before me at the moment, it seems that these creatures have the capability of cursing you. And if you come from a culture where you believe in curses, this would be something that would seem very real.
I've always wanted to see one, but after finding out that you might be cursed or you might die, I kind of don't like the idea anymore.
No, it doesn't seem like this is ever something that kind of works out well for the person who sees one of these creatures.
That's for sure.
I think one of the other rules that kind of concerned me just a little bit was this rule of gifting, where people leave gifts for them or leave food for them. That is not always a good thing when it comes to things like this, in my opinion.
Yeah, because what happens when the gifting stops? It's almost like there's an obligation there, and you are obligated for the rest of your life to continue this. And if you stop, there might be problems.
The Pukwudgie story in particular, it seemed like they like to be worshipped, and I would suspect that gifting may be part of what they considered to be worship. And when that gifting went towards Mashop in that particular instance, that seemed to be what caused some of the strife between the humans and the Pukwudgies. So I think the other thing that stands out is, are these creatures magical or are they real?
That's a good question. It seems like with creatures like this and other fairy creatures or magical type creatures, there's this idea that they are part flesh and blood and part magic. If they can be seen but also disappear at will, what does that make them? Are they flesh and blood, or are they magic, or are they a combination of both? It's kind of interesting. You hear things about Bigfoot or other cryptids that kind of have these same properties.
Yeah, and it's kind of the ultimate question, right? What are these things? And I don't know that we have the answers to that. I think ultimately one thing is clear, though, that the Native Americans both feared and honored these little beings. With America being a melting pot, it would be expected that these types of tales would have followed with the immigrants from Europe. But what is strange is that these tales existed in North America even long before the immigrants arrived. It is also clear that when it comes to the little people, a little respect seems to go a long way. Native Americans showed this respect and gave the little people their space. Perhaps this is why many of the tribes have been able to maintain good relationships with the little people. So, next time you're in the woods, be sure to keep a lookout for some little folk. All right, folks, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you listening. If you have enjoyed the show, please consider subscribing. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And remember, if you've had a paranormal experience that you would like to share, please email us at prairielandparanormalpodcast@gmail.com or visit our website at prairielandparanormalpodcast.com. So until next time, remember, don't be normal when you can be paranormal.